with so much going on these days in the way of investigations, and we still have Robert Mueller's special counsel. Of course, he was supposed to look into potential illegal collusion between President Trump and Russia, and it's morphed into basically whatever he wants to pursue. Kind of like the investigation that James Comey, as the Deputy Attorney General, recommended that the then Attorney General, John Ashcroft, should recuse himself, which he followed that advice. And then Mr. Comey was able to appoint his very dear friend and his child's godfather, Patrick Fitzgerald, to be the special counsel, and Mr. Comey apparently knew at the time the investigation began that the person that leaked Valley Plains' identity as a CIA agent was named Richard Hermitage, somebody they did not want to go after, even though it was supposed to have been a crime, but they weren't interested in the crime. They were interested in nailing a person or persons. And it really appears that's not only what Patrick Fitzgerald did. He wanted somebody's hide, and apparently it was Dick Cheney's. Might have settled for Karl Rove. Apparently the offer was made more than once. It was reported that Fitzgerald was offering Scooter Libby, if you can just give me anything that will convict Vice President Cheney, then we'll make sure you don't have anything to worry about. But Scooter Libby was not going to allow to get himself out from under the gun. And as was reported, witness against him, Judy Miller, later believed when she found some notes, whoops, Libby had not lied as she originally thought. Apparently he was interested, or he was innocent just as he had contended, and apparently would have walked away without any problems, without the full force of the federal government coming after him, if he had just given him anything that, that's Comey's child's godfather, given him anything that would have allowed him to convict Vice President Cheney. And it appears Mueller's investigation now has ceased looking for a crime involving Trump and Russia and is focused on just finding something, kind of like the effort that Comey's buddy, if it's Comey's buddy, since we're told Comey and Mueller basically joined at the hip, then must have been Mueller's friend too, but they wanted Vice President Cheney, and when Scooter Libby wouldn't lie and do that, well, they convicted him of lying when apparently he did not lie. He was innocent, which you can go back and find these type of things in Robert Mueller's wake, whether it was as the Assistant U.S. Attorney in charge of criminal investigations in Boston, when they were found to later to have had people that worked for Mueller who were in bed with Whitey Bulger, mob leader, and Mueller kept insisting that these 4 people that were framed by FBI agents should remain in prison and not be paroled. 2 of them died in prison, and there was ultimately a settlement, but Mueller couldn't be bothered with the settlement because of the actions of the people that worked for him. Just like he went after Dr. Hatfield, claiming that he was the anthrax killer. And some say that was the highest profile case his FBI's director had handled. Others would say it was the prosecution and conviction of Ted Stevens, U.S. Senator, which we later found out was a frame-up. The FBI is reported to have hidden evidence that completely exonerated him and manufactured evidence. And after that came to light, his conviction, all of the case was dropped, as it should have been, well before it was ever even pursued. But they got the intended result. The trial, a week or so before his election, he was convicted and therefore lost the election. Kind of like what Mueller, as FBI director, had his FBI do to Kirk Weldon, that I saw stand at this podium numerous times and talk about the FBI had some information before 9/11 that showed that they could have stopped it, something like that. But he just kept beating up on the FBI. I didn't have any idea whether what Kirk Weldon was talking about was true or not. But I do know that just a few weeks before his reelect, after he'd been easily reelected a number of times, and after he was shown to have a decent lead over a very good Democratic opponent, 3 weeks before the election, the FBI stormed his daughter's office, and Mueller's FBI had leaked the information apparently because place was covered up with reporters of all kinds so that they could document the raid on Kirk Weldon's daughter's office. And shortly thereafter, protesters with signs showed up at Kirk's office claiming that he'd been caught red-handed. And the implications were clear from the FBI that Kirk Weldon was guilty of something, and that brought about his defeat by about 2%. And as I understand, a year after that raid on the Weldons, the FBI contacted Kirk Weldon's daughter and said, you need to come pick up all this stuff. There was never a grand jury that we know of. There was no indictment. There was no real investigation. Mueller's FBI got tired of Kirk Weldon making allegations from this podium I'm standing at now, and they silenced him as a representative. So, and there's much more, but we find out, and there's an article in the American Thinker by Daniel John Sabisky, and it talks about Uranium One, and it says back in July, I called for a criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton's collusion with Russia to turn over control of 20% of our uranium supplies to Russian interests in return for some $145 million in donations to the Clinton Foundation. Now it turns out there was one, an FBI investigation dating back to 2009 with current Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller up to their eyeballs in covering up evidence of Hillary's collusion bordering on treason with Vladimir Putin's Russia. Prior to the Obama administration approving the very controversial deal in 2010, giving Russia 20% of America's uranium, the FBI had evidence that Russian nuclear industry officials were involved in bribery, kickbacks, extortion, and money laundering in order to benefit Vladimir Putin, says a report by The Hill. John Solomon, Allison Spann of The Hill, federal agent, said this: federal agents used confidential U.S. witness working inside the Russian nuclear industry to gather extensive financial records, make secret recordings, and intercept emails as early as 2009 that showed Moscow had compromised an American uranium trucking firm with bribes and kickbacks in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FBI and court documents show. So from today's report, we find out that the investigation was by then U.S. Attorney Rod Rosenstein, who is now President Trump's Deputy Attorney General, and then Assistant FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who is now the Deputy FBI Director under Trump. Robert Mueller was head of the FBI from 2001 through September 2013 until James Comey took over as FBI Director in 2013. They were both involved in this Russian scam, being that this case started in 2009 and ended in 2015. And let me insert parenthetically, Mr. Speaker, I don't know who recommended that the U.S. attorney investigating Russian collusion with Hillary Clinton and with the trucking firm, with others here in the United States. But whoever recommended Rod Rosenstein to President Trump as Deputy Attorney General should be fired, whoever that was. They're not there to help President Trump. On further down, the article says, Tuesday on Fox Business Network, Lou Dobbs tonight, Breitbart editor-at-large and the author of Clinton Cash, Peter Schweitzer, said there needs to be a federal investigation into the Russian uranium deal. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's State Department approved after the Clinton Foundation received $145 million from the shareholders of Uranium One. So it's rather interesting. The article goes on to point out that about the investigation into Hillary Clinton, and it quotes from Schweitzer saying a lot of people don't realize it now in parts of the Midwest, American soil is owned by Vladimir Putin's government because this deal went through. He goes on and makes some interesting observation. At the conclusion, he says, actually, we no longer need an investigation of Hillary Clinton and Uranium One. This FBI investigation, in conjunction to what we already know, is prima facie evidence of criminal corruption and intentional putting of American national security at risk for personal financial gain. Then this article from Lee Smith, March 13th, titled Robert Mueller's Beltway Cover-Up. And this points out that if the deep state here, and it does cross party lines, they wanted somebody to effectively cover up all of the leaks, each one of which is a crime punishable by time in prison. If the deep state here in Washington wanted somebody that could protect all these criminals that are working in intelligence or FBI that regularly leak information to hurt people that threaten their power here in Washington, then they could not have a better person as special counsel than Robert Mueller, as overseen by Rod Rosenstein. Points out that Mueller took his job not at the behest of the man who by all accounts he is likely to professionally and personally disdain, Donald Trump, but of the blue chip Beltway elite of which he is a charter member. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein appointed him nearly a year ago to lead an investigation without parameters. That's because Mueller's job is to obscure the abuses of the U.S. surveillance apparatus that occurred under the Obama administration. The fact that someone at the level of former FBI director was called in to sweep up the mess left by bad actors in the Bureau and Central Intelligence Agency and other parts of the intelligence bureaucracy suggests that the problems are even worse than previously thought. And that means the constituency for Mueller's political intervention is enormous. Mueller is said to believe that Eric Prince's meeting, he's referencing back in January 2017 with a Russian banker, that would be well after the election, obviously, was set up to set up a back channel with the Kremlin. But that makes no sense. According to the foundational text of the collusion narrative, the dossier allegedly written by former British spy Christopher Steele, the Kremlin had cultivated Trump himself for years. So what's the purpose of a back channel when supposedly Vladimir Putin already had a key to the front door of Mar-a-Lago? Further, the collusion thesis holds that the Trump circle teamed with high-level Russian officials for the purpose of winning the 2016 election. How does a meeting that Eric Prince had a week before Trump's inauguration advance the crooked election victory plot? It doesn't. It contradicts it. Eric Prince may well be involved in questionable practices that would make people's blood run cold, and he talked some about Eric Prince. But the idea that whenever anyone who supported Trump or even voted for him met with a Russian national, the menu was treason is the stuff of Cold War B movies. But it's also evidence of something more than prosecutorial overreach. The fact that Mueller has zeroed in on Prince points to a key motive behind his ongoing investigation. And he talks about Prince thrown into the middle of Russiagate after April 3rd, 2017, Washington Post reported his meeting with the Russian banker. But how did anyone know about the meeting? After the story came out, Prince said he was shown specific evidence by sources from the intelligence community that the information was swept up in the collection of electronic communications and his identity was unmasked. The U.S. official or officials who gave his name to the Washington Post broke the law when they leaked classified information. And then on further, it says Mueller presumably knows whether Prince's name was indeed unmasked and then leaked to the press, and that the leak was a crime. Mueller certainly knows that most of the case he has regarding Russian interference in the 2016 election was built by abuses of the foreign intelligence surveillance apparatus and other related crimes that are punishable with jail time. The identity of Trump's short-term national security advisor, Michael Flynn, was swept up and leaked to the press in the same way as Prince's. It was leaked to the same newspaper, the Washington Post. As I explained last week, the identity of Attorney General Jeff Sessions was also unmasked from an intelligence intercept and leaked to the Washington Post. The fact that the FBI had secured a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant on Carter Page was also leaked to the Post. The warrant on Page was secured on the basis of findings in the Steele dossier, an unverified piece of opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign and Democratic National Committee. As director of the FBI during the post-9/11 period, when foreign intelligence surveillance and its abuses were made regular front-page headlines, Mueller knows exactly how the system can be abused and what the penalties are. He also recognizes that Russiagate is evidence of how it was abused and who abused it, including some of the same people he worked with during his 12-year tenure as FBI director. The purpose of the Mueller inquiry is therefore not to investigate the most ludicrously seeming charges in the Steele dossier, but to protect the institution of the FBI, former colleagues, as well as the national security surveillance system. Therefore, the inquiry has to cover up the sinful origins of the collusion narrative itself, which was born in repeated abuses of power and subsequent crimes committed by U.S. officials in the intelligence bureaucracy and the Obama administration. So, Mr. Speaker, regardless of what there are some Republicans that are unhappy that he was elected president, want him gone at all cost. And I know that most of the Democrats I know, it just grieves them to no end that he was elected. They want him gone at all cost. But at some point, members of Congress in the House and Senate have got to wake up to the fact that we have crimes being committed in the FBI intelligence apparatus. There are people who are being paid with government checks who are out to destroy people who disagree with their power grabs and their crimes. This article points out Mueller's investigation has got to drag on as long as necessary to prevent any of the people who have committed the crimes of leaking and other crimes, leaking, lying, perjury, obstructing justice, trying to create an insurance policy to take out a sitting president of the United States. It's time we wake up. When elected officials in this city have to fear for their political lives by people that they have given power in the FBI, DOJ, CIA, NSA, then the system's broken. It is out of control. And it's how you lose a democratic republic like we have, or like we used to have. It's time to get it under control. Mueller is not the answer. He's the problem. He is the poster child for the problem that he's created during his entire tenure. And if he had any decency, he would have never accepted this special prosecution on anything involving Russia, because he had been involved in that investigation, and because he remained silent or perhaps spoke up to keep it hush-hush. But he and Rosenstein both, they should have stopped the sale of 20% of our uranium to a national enemy. Apparently, the Obama administration was so intent on that reset because they felt like, George W. Bush just overreacted. All Putin did was invade Georgia, one country invading another, smaller, weaker country. And Bush, they felt like overreacted, said you shouldn't be doing this, put some sanctions in place. So they wanted to show we're just fine with you invading adjoining countries, maybe even those that don't adjoin, but sure, at least adjoining countries. They gave the red light, whether they knew it or not, to Putin to invade the Crimea, invade Ukraine. And they gave the green light. They had to know this because it was part of what they did. They gave the green light to the sale of 20% of our uranium to a country that most recently had its dictatorial leader bragging that he had missiles that he could put those nukes on that the United States couldn't stop. And those nukes can be tipped, at least 20% of them, with what Hillary Clinton, Mueller, Rosenstein had to be complicit in giving them and letting them have. This is serious stuff. But until the leakers and the abusers of our intelligence system are brought to justice, then nobody that believes in representative government is safe. We end up like China, like Russia, where you're scared to death of the people behind the scenes, behind the government, or even the dictatorial leader, because, you know, they made you and they can destroy you. And when the free press is not free, they're complicit in assisting in the committing of crimes by gladly accepting the leaks, publishing them to complete the crime. We're in big trouble. So I would say, you know, if Mueller had any decency, he would just resign. And he doesn't even have to explain how wrong it was for him to accept the appointment. I had hoped that the damage he did to the FBI would have come to an end when his 10 years was up. But, oh no, President Obama was so thrilled with the things he was doing, he extended his term 2 years and pushed through Congress. People wouldn't listen to me. Oh no, this is not a guy you want for 2 more years. He's done enough damage. And any Republican that says, oh, he'll be fair, is either desperately wanting President Trump gone or is intentionally ignoring the facts of Mueller's background from the days as the assistant U.S. attorney in charge of crime in Boston up through the present. There's a lot of innocent people that lie in his wake. Some of them got $1 million, multi-million-dollar settlements for the damage Mueller did to them, but most didn't even get an apology. Mueller couldn't be bothered with how many millions were paid out in Boston because of what he oversaw. He couldn't be bothered with the $5.8 million that was paid to Hatfield because the FBI under Mueller and under his direction, apparently from what articles said, he took direct oversight over the Hatfield investigation, assuring when there was no evidence that he committed any wrong that he was still the one. It's time that Mueller's investigation come to an end. I think Lee Smith had it right. I think the article by Daniel John Sobieski had things right. We've already had an investigation of Russian collusion, and it was done by U.S. Attorney Rob Rosenstein and FBI Director Robert Mueller, and they shut her down, shut up the information so the Clinton Foundation could be the beneficiary, and goodness sakes, they were big-time beneficiaries. That I yield back.
Yields